Louisiana. Back on the Patrick Netherton Show, 11:30 The Tiger. We're pleased to welcome in the lead college football writer for the Associated Press, who I'm assuming is back to those duties now after moonlighting a little bit on the news side for a bit. He is Ralph Russo, and he joins us right now. Ralph, are you back full-time sports writing, or are you still getting some of your news in?
No. Here's the way that worked, though, Patrick. I have always been. I never gave up the sports part. I was doing both jobs for a little while, and honestly, I don't want to make myself sound like a martyr. I was involved a little bit on covering COVID and with a podcast, but no, there's been so much sports news, so much college sports news that people ask me all the time, like, what are you doing now when there's no games? And I'm like, man, I have never had a busier off season.
Yeah.
Just seeing if this thing is going to be able to take flight.
It's a whirlwind, to be sure, and we've talked a lot about basically the NCAA and the various governing bodies within, and Lord knows they love to make themselves some councils and board of governors, and I mean they've got more groups of people to decide things than any organization I've ever seen. But they're running out of road to kick the can down now. The road is, we're coming to the end of the flat earth here before they're going to have to kick the can off the face of the earth. When they finally went down to the council, which is mostly ADs and whatnot, where do we stand in terms of that? And what do you think the ultimate outcome is with this moving from the presidents and the sort of academicians down to the more athletic-minded group?
Okay, so there's a couple of different ways to look at this, and I think the part of it is you still have to understand that they're not making a determination on when the NCAA says we are going to have the Division I Council make a determination on whether the NCAA should stage all championships, championships in fall sports. What does that mean? That means that postseason for soccer and volleyball and lower division football. Yeah. So FCS, which I know is near and dear to the hearts of the people, some of the people who listen to your station.
Well, sure, and me.
So that's that. Yeah, and you, right? So that's important stuff, but it's also not related to college football. I think the decision becomes more of almost a symbolic decision in some sense, because the other part of it is, if you cancel those fall championships, that doesn't mean that schools can't go about and compete in the regular season. Mm-hmm. But the signal you're sending, though, if you cancel those fall championships, is, hey, if we don't think this is worth doing from the NCAA perspective and having a championship event, if we think it's too hard to make it safe, what does that say about the viability of having a regular season? What does this say about the viability of trying to put on a football season? So it almost is more of a messaging thing as much as it is a practical decision that would wipe out football.
Yeah. I mean, the NCAA has
that part of it.
Yeah, the NCAA hasn't been involved really in FBS football in a long time. But I'm curious, because just from I don't want to say a PR standpoint, but just from of an efficiency standpoint, is it odd that we have a school president or a group of school presidents who rule on some of these things when we don't know what they know about athletics versus having ADs and conference commissioners and those types of people that are making these decisions?
Well, yes and no. So I would say this. So now it's at the council level, and you're right. Now it's at the hands of the people who are basically the athletic practitioners, mm-hmm. right? So what I would say is, good luck having them throw up a stop sign.
Sure.
Right. If we, and that's the other part of it too. Like, I think we will have a college football season. I think we will have a college sports season, because I don't think there's anybody who wants to stop it. Like, I just haven't found out, like, who is the if nobody's job is to stop this and make that call, then I think almost like we'll have it by inertia, right? Like, it will just happen because it would take an act to stop it, and nobody seems to be in position to cause that act. And I'm also, by the way, I don't know if we should or shouldn't, quite frankly. Like, I'm a little torn on that. Like, I do believe, like, these schools are doing a ton of work to keep these players safe. As I think I've talked about on your show, my wife is an epidemiologist.
Yep.
She has sort of walked me through, like, how you can do contact sports, team sports, and do them, like, relatively safely mitigating a lot of risk by doing a lot of testing and things along those lines. So, like, I could see a path to doing this, but I also could see a path to having this start and just be, I think at this point it becomes how much disruption is too much. Like, everybody has said, there's going to be disruptions. There's going to be disruptions. So what does that mean? And at what point is it too much?
Yeah.
I also get a sense of it. Oh, I'm sorry, Patrick.
No, go ahead.
No, I was also, I had a chance to, interview Mark Emmert yesterday,
Mm-hmm.
and, his point was this is not going to be an NCAA decision. To a certain degree, it's not even going to be a conference-level decision. It's going to be an institution-level decision. Now, I do think the conferences will try to act in, a cohesive manner. I mean, listen, we couldn't even get 10 Power 5 conferences to collaborate and act in a cohesive way.
Yep.
Right? I think within the conference, you will probably have a better chance of them acting in a collaborative way. But I got to admit, like, if I'm LSU, I may prioritize my football season more than I might if I'm Missouri or if I'm Mississippi State and I get off to an 0-4 start. Like, that's the other thing that I keep wondering is, like, what will these schools do when they get off to a bad start and the players become hard to motivate and, now we got to shut you down for a week or two. But don't worry, you can come back in a week. Like, what does that start looking like getting into, November? Will teams start peeling off? So I think people, like, maybe might have seen that Emmer quote and poo-pooed it, but I do think that there's an element of this that is going to be done at the institutional level, at the college level, that as we go along may determine if this season holds together. I think
it's gonna end up being a lot like Houston from last year when they started 1-3, and all of a sudden their 2-3 best players decide they're all going to redshirt because they have the new 4-game redshirt rules. You start 1-3 this year, your star players are just going to start shutting it down, I think, because there's really, especially if there's no championship to play for at that point, and you're not worried about a bowl game, some random bowl game. I think you might see those guys start shutting it down.
I do. I really do wonder what the poor teams look like. And again, if I'm a good player and I maybe I can't run to the NFL, but I wouldn't mind keeping my year of eligibility because, boy, what am I using my year of eligibility on this nonsense for? That's what, like, listen, right now we've had some really prominent players opt out, and
Sure.
They are, almost sure first-round draft picks. Micah Parsons from Penn State today, Caleb Farley from Virginia Tech, Gregory Russo, the really good defensive end from Miami, opted out today. Those guys are no doubt NFL players. I think the majority of players are still on board on this, but I think that becomes harder to maintain that level of player engagement as you go along. And again, teams start becoming like, hey, I got to get this swab stuck up my nose, 2 or 3 times a week. We're not winning. I can't go out. Like, what are we doing here, folks? So I wonder if that's going to be a problematic as the season goes along.
Talking to Ralph Russo.
Assuming the season starts.
Sure, assuming we have a season. Talking to Ralph Russo, lead college football writer for the Associated Press. Backing up, you were mentioning no one seems to want, by inertia almost, the season seems like it's going to go off because no one wants to pull the trigger. I was saying earlier today, Ralph, we have decision makers who aren't making decisions. Right? That's what it seems like we have right now. No, and I totally understand it. No one wants to be the one that makes the absolute call because you're going to get criticized by someone for, you either say, let's play football, the virus comes back, kids get sick, maybe somebody dies, you've got people all over you. You say, let's don't have football. Maybe the virus dies down, the vaccine comes out in a few weeks, all of a sudden you could have had football in October and November, but you already shut the season down. The decision makers are abdicating their decision making responsibilities right now because they don't want to be the one that has to face the music, I think.
Yeah, I do think there's a little bit of that going on. Saying, well, we're going to move forward and see what happens. We're just going to move forward and see what happens.
Yeah.
Then all of a sudden, what happens is you're playing games, right? Like you really, like you just keep taking it one step at a time. Essentially, at some point, you're playing games, and that's really where they want to be. You know, you talk about this. Listen, I think ultimately where the buck could stop, and you talked about, well, shouldn't this be done by athletic practitioners as opposed to university presidents? And here's where I push back on you, Patrick, and where the buck might end up stopping. If the thing is, if the plug is pulled, it might be really, it will come from the university president level. And maybe that is best. Maybe it's best if it's not the people who are so invested in athletics, the people above them who see the bigger picture and say, do I really want my school, my university, which has a mission to educate kids and keep them safe, do I really want them involved in this? There's another element to this, Patrick, which I believe is a conversation. Like I'm of the opinion that the first league that might pull the plug, if there is one, is the Big Ten.
Mm-hmm.
And it comes from conversations I've had with Big Ten leaders. I think it comes from the fact that they have a commissioner who's new to college sports. So I think he may see this thing differently. And I start wondering, when the conversations focus on should we play or should we not play, as opposed to, and it's a slightly different version of the same conversation, is this worth saving?
Yeah.
Is this going to be so difficult? Is this going to have so much disruption? Is the potential for problems, maybe even really bad problems, but if problems are just, hey, we have to shut this down for a little while, a bunch of kids get infected, but they're all better in a few weeks. But is the potential for problems so much that this is not worth saving?
Yeah.
And I think some of those conversations are going on, but I don't know if enough of them are to actually pull the plug on this.
And by the way, don't misconstrue me. I don't think the AD should be the one making this decision. I just question it. You know, what are the optics when you have the non-athletic folks making athletics decisions? But ultimately, it does have to be the presidents who make this because they're looking out for the entirety of the university, not just the bottom line of the athletic department. So I get the decision-making process there. One other thing, Ralph, and I was talking about this yesterday. There's sort of I don't know how hidden, how secretive it is, and I told everyone I kind of was pulling back the curtain a little bit on the finances of college athletics because Barry Alvarez is at Wisconsin crying about how they're losing $100 million in revenue, and they're putting a fund together to try to get the Wisconsinites to help fund the athletic program because of all of these losses. And I went back and I mentioned, you know, the reason why this happens is because college athletics basically spends everything it earns so it doesn't look like a for-profit business. Is that fair? And is that maybe one of sort of the hidden secrets of college athletics is the reason why they're pushing so hard to play is because they don't operate like a business. Therefore, they don't have anything in reserve to help out for a rainy day.
Yeah, I mean, you're definitely along the right track there, Patrick. Now, there are some athletic departments and athletic, associations, right? So a lot of these athletic departments have a profit wing or they're funded by not necessarily by another wing of the I'm bad at business, so I'm using the wrong terminology here.
Ralph, like LSU has the Tiger Athletic Foundation, which is the fundraising arm, and they get money from that. It has a stockpile of money, but typically it is usually earmarked for something.
Right. So you have that at a lot of campuses, and yes, there's a lot of money comes in. We spend it. We are a nonprofit organization, and there's the motivation to not necessarily remain a nonprofit, and then there's also again the idea that we are in an arms race, right? Like we have to spend it. There's also this idea of we have to spend it on. We're not giving. It's another conversation, right? We're not spending it. We're not giving it to the athletes, but we have to keep coming up with ways to spend this money on the athletes, sort of indirectly through facilities and coaches and all kinds of programs, maybe a stipend, maybe unlimited meals, so we can show that this is all sort of tethered to education. And look, we're all about athletes, benefiting the athletes, but we're also not paying the athletes, because that would be a problem.
Yeah.
Because then we would make them employees, and it would subject us to antitrust violations, which they've already been accused of. So it is not a business model that is really built on a very strong foundation. I think we're all realizing now that this was something of a house of cards, and now one bad year can make it come tumbling down. I'll add one more thing, though, Patrick, and some news that came out of the Pac-12 yesterday through one of our really good reporters who does great work out there, John Wilner with San Jose Mercury News, talked about how the Pac-12 is looking at possibly, looking into a massive loan. Basically, like, get us through this. We're going to take out a massive loan. We're going to use our television rights as collateral, and we can, and that will pull us through this. Because the fact of the matter is, this is a temporary problem, especially for the Power 5 conferences. The money hose will flow once we get past the pandemic. Like, if they can just get through the next, 6 months to a year, there's a ton of gold at the end of this thing waiting for them in new TV contracts, current TV contracts. It's a short-term problem. There's a lot of money hanging out there for these conferences, especially the big conferences.
I kind of feel bad, though, if the Pac-12 goes to a bank and says, hey, we need a huge loan, and here's our collateral, it's our television deals, and the bank goes, I'm sorry, we can't find the Pac-12 network, we're not going to give you this loan. I feel bad for them. I really do.
The funny thing is, Patrick, though, within the spectrum of college sports, like, relative to the other Power 5 conferences, the Pac-12 is absolutely, like, doesn't stack up.
No.
But the funny thing is, though, they're making a mint, relative to other businesses. Like, they still have a very valuable product because, the way the media industry is set up these days, we're so desperate for content that people will watch live, that they're still really valuable. So that's the funny thing. Like, I think people are right. They're like, oh, man, the Pac-12 has to get a loan and they're going to get turned down, and what a bad investment. But that just shows where college sports is, that, like, the worst of the Power 5 conferences is still printing money.
Yeah. No, it's a money-making machine. There's no doubt about that. Ralph Russo, college football writer for the Associated Press. All right, final thing, Ralph. Put on your Johnny Carson Nostradamus hat or whatever he wore. Karnak. Karnak. There you go. Put on your big Karnak.
You and I are both
thing.
Old, if we remember that.
Well, actually, I had to get my producer Rogers to tell me because I didn't remember it. I just remembered he did the thing. I didn't remember the name of the guy. I'm not that old yet, Ralph. All right, so put on your Karnak hat and give me some idea of, or if you can even elucidate an idea of what you think college football looks like this year, if it exists at all.
Yeah, I really do. I think the season will start. I think that you've got these plans in place, and I think for all the reasons I've sort of laid out, I think we are moving in that direction methodically, lumbering in the direction of a season, and we will get there. I think it really does just depend on, like, level of tolerance and, to a certain degree, luck. Now, I will say this. Here's the one thing that I say could shut us down. Students are about to return to campus.
Yep.
If that triggers a bunch of outbreaks on campuses, not even necessarily within football teams, but if that in some way starts tipping the numbers around these campuses in these states in a way that is problematic, not just for football, but for health and safety of the population in general, that could be the one thing that I do think could pull the plug, could end up pulling the plug on the whole thing. If we don't get to that, if we can get through students returning to campus with only, minimal uptick, I think we lumber through it, and I think it becomes luck, because to a certain degree it's going to be luck, right? It's
right.
going to be like, hey, we happen to be the team that managed to avoid the the outbreaks and to a certain degree, level of tolerance for disruption. At what level are people willing to accept this sort of herky-jerky season? And that means players, coaches, fans to a certain degree. At a certain point, fans could end up checking out too. It's really a disruptive season. So I think to a certain degree, it's going to be luck and tolerance.
Well, and that just kind of brings into relief what went down at Louisville, right? They had 29 folks test positive for COVID from a party. None of them were football players that we're aware of. And then they start dismissing kids from school because they were acting inappropriately and outside what they were supposed to be doing in terms of quarantining, curfew, and all of that stuff. So, this could then become a problem because now you've got to deal with discipline if kids start stepping out of line.
I mean, we're at the end of our interview, so I don't want to get too deep into it, but oh my gosh, what an interesting case if you're going to start suspending kids for getting sick.
Mm-hmm.
I understand that's not why they were suspended. I understand technically they were suspended for breaking rules, but think about play that through in your head what that sounds like and where that could be going as this season plays out. Because if I'm one of those parents, I am absolutely not happy about my kid getting thrown off a team because he got sick.
Yeah. No, we're in uncharted waters, my friend. There's no telling what the heck's going to happen. But look, you're the best. I appreciate your time. I know you kind of bunkered down a little bit up there as the news has been flying fast and furious, and I appreciate you spending a little time with us, Ralph.
Happy to do it, Patrick. Thank you.
All right, Ralph Russo, lead college football writer for the Associated Press.